Hi everyone. Welcome back to the June-July 2018 Paper 1 lecture series. Let's begin with the question number 3. The question is, in the two sets given below, set 1 indicates methods of teaching, while set 2 provides the basic requirements for success or effectiveness. Match the two sets and indicate your answer by choosing from the codes. There are 2 sets and 4 codes given. Now, this is a matching type question, right? So even if you are not confident about every concept, you can still solve it logically. Let's look at set 1, option A, lecturing. A lecturing mainly depends on content and language, right? So it matches with content delivery in a lucid language of set 2, which is option 3. Now if we check the codes that match A with 3, we find only one option. That's chord 3. So let's eliminate all the other chords right here and verify the remaining pairs in the chord 3. Next, option B in set 1, discussion in groups, matches with 5 of set 2, theme-based interaction among participants. That's correct, because discussion means participants interacting around a common theme. Now, option C, brainstorming of set 1, matches with 2 of set 2, production of large number of ideas. That is also correct because the main purpose of brainstorming is to generate as many as ideas possible. Finally, option D, programmed instructional procedure, which is matched with 1 of set 2, small steps with immediate feedback. Wherever you see small steps plus feedback, immediately think of programmed instruction. It is explained by B.F. Skinner. So all the matches are correct. So the right answer is chord 3. Now let's look at the theory aspects of methods of teaching. A method of teaching refers to the systematic way in which a teacher, trainer, or instructor organizes content, engages learners, and facilitates learning. There are several ways to classify teaching methods depending on learning objectives, learner characteristics, the classroom situation, etc. However, the simplest and the most commonly used classification is based on who controls the learning. They are of two types, teacher-centered methods and learner-centered methods. But remember, teaching is eclectic. That means we don't stick to just one method. A good teacher combines methods depending on situation, objectives, and learners' needs. Now let's differentiate between teacher-centered and learner-centered methods. I want you to note all the highlighted words in the slide because you get questions from almost every word here. First, teacher-centered methods. Teacher-centered methods are the traditional and conventional approach where the teacher is the main source of knowledge, decision-making, and control. Here, the teacher is active. Students are comparatively passive. Students mainly listen, observe, and respond. But the teacher plans the lesson, delivers the content, controls the pace, and also evaluates learning. The classroom environment is usually structured and disciplined. Communication is mostly one way. Information flows from the teacher to the students. Because of this one-way flow, it is called as direct method of teaching. Now here is something important. Even though teaching is direct, learning is not always guaranteed. Students may be listening, but we cannot be 100% sure they are understood. Correct? That's why it is sometimes referred to as the indirect method of learning. It is also known as the deductive method of teaching because here the teacher begins with a rule or general principle and then explains it with examples. Think of it like a strict police officer giving orders. First the rule, then the application. So remember, general to specific or concept to example, that is direction. Anyway, even today, teacher-centered methods are widely used, especially when the syllabus is vast, time is limited, strong subject expertise is required. For example, if you have to complete multiple units in a short time, teacher-centered methods become practical and effective. Now let's move to learner-centered methods. These are relatively modern approaches. Here, students are active. They explore, question, discuss, and create. The teacher becomes a facilitator rather than a controller. These methods are more flexible, highly participative, and interactive. Here, information flows through multiple channels of knowledge, from teacher to students, students to teachers, students to students, etc. Because of transfer of information happens from various sources and directions, it is called the indirect method of teaching. However, learning becomes active and meaningful, so it is considered as the direct method of learning. Students also develop self-discipline and responsibility here. It is also known as the inductive method of teaching. Why? Because students first observe examples and then arrive at a concept or a rule. Remember, from example to concept or from specific concepts to general concepts, that is induction. Some important types under each classification are mentioned here, and that's what we'll explore in detail next. Let's learn some of the important teacher-centered methods first. Take a guess. What do you think is one of the oldest and most widely used teacher-centered methods? Yes, lecture method. Here, the teacher gives a systematic oral presentation to a group of students, and it is characterized by structured content and clear or lucid language. As I mentioned earlier, the highlighted words are very important from the exam point of view, so make sure you pay close attention to them. So, as an example for the lecture method, a professor or a teacher delivering a 40 to 60 minutes lecture on a topic in a classroom. You must have definitely experienced this throughout your life, right? The advantages here are quite obvious. When the syllabus is large or the time is limited, this method helps us cover content efficiently and quickly. It is cost effective. And when done it properly, it is very well structured and organized. But there are disadvantages too. One-way communication, students are mostly passive, and thereby long-term retention becomes poor. The second method is demonstration. In this method, the teacher shows a procedure and students observe carefully. This is usually followed by practice. So here, students learn by seeing first, then doing. For example, a chemistry teacher performing a titration experiment in front of the class before students try it themselves in the lab. The advantages are it is highly visual, it connects theory to practice, and it is especially useful where safety is important. But there are limitations too. Hands-on practice may be limited if time is short. It requires proper equipment, and also if students only watch without practicing, it can again become passive. So remember, demonstration works beautifully only when it is followed by practice. The third method is team teaching. This is a strategy in which two or more teachers collaboratively plan, instruct, and evaluate the same group of students. There is shared responsibility, collaborated instruction, and integration of expertise. For example, in a psychology class on stress management, one teacher may explain the theoretical concepts of stress while an expert or a psychologist conducts a practical relaxation session. This ensures both conceptual clarity and skill development. The advantages include it promotes multiple perspectives, better understanding, interdisciplinary learning, varied teaching styles, and improved classroom interaction. However, coordination can be difficult. It requires careful planning, mutual understanding, and sometimes involves higher resource costs. There may even be conflicts if roles are not clearly defined. In exams, remember team teaching equals strong collaboration. Next one is panel discussion. It is a structured discussion method in which a small group of experts, usually 3 to 6 members, discuss a specific topic in front of an audience under the guidance of a moderator who directs the flow of conversation. Each panelist presents their viewpoints, responds to questions, and may interact with other panel members. For example, a discussion on the impact of artificial intelligence in classrooms. A psychologist, school authority, a technology expert, and a teacher may share their insights, followed by audience questions. Panel discussions promotes critical thinking, exposure to diverse viewpoints, and highly informative content, and also deeper understanding of complex topics. However, it is passive as students remain mostly observers, and sometimes one speaker may dominate if moderation is weak. So it requires a strong moderation. Personally, I love panel discussions. It feels very interactive and inspiring. Now let's talk about Socratic method. It is also a type of discussion method. This method is based on disciplined questioning. Instead of giving direct answers, the teacher asks a series of probing open-ended questions that lead students to discover answers through reasoning. It refines their thinking and arrives at a deeper conceptual clarity. It originated from Socrates, who believed that knowledge emerges through dialogue and self-examination. It is a dialectical method. It is widely used in law institutions. For example, in a class, instead of defining a topic, the teacher may ask, "Why do you say that? What are you assuming here? Why do you think this is true? And what would happen if," etc. The Socratic method develops analytical thinking, reasoning ability, communication skills, and intellectual discipline. However, it requires skilled questioning, active participation, and may be time consuming. So both the panel discussion and the Socratic method are teacher-centered discussion methods controlled by a moderator and a teacher respectively. And most importantly, it happens on any specific topic or theme. Now the next method is programmed instruction or programmed learning. It is based on B.F. Skinner's behaviorist theory, particularly operant conditioning. Skinner observed that learning is most effective when correct responses are immediately reinforced, and he developed the idea of teaching machines, a system that presented questions to students and instantly provided feedback on their answers. This concept later evolved into programmed learning materials and modern computer-based modules. In programmed instruction, learning happens through a simple sequence of stimulus or the content. Here, the content is carefully broken down into small steps called frames, and learners respond to each frame. Immediate feedback is provided after each response. This feedback reinforces correct answers, and progression is carefully sequenced and controlled to ensure that learners master one concept before moving to the next. For example, a self-paced computer-based Python training module. Here, the learning sequence is stimulus, then response, and finally reinforcement. The advantages here are predetermined structure, fixed learning path, immediate feedback, self-paced, logical and systematic, etc. But there are disadvantages too. It lacks human interaction, so feels mechanical. It is rigid and limits creativity. You may wonder, if it is self-paced and individualized, why is not a learner-centered? Because the entire structure is controlled by a programmer. The learner controls only the pace, not the content, sequence, or method. So remember, small steps plus immediate feedback plus Skinner is equal to programmed instruction. Now the last method under teacher-centered methods is micro-teaching. Micro-teaching actually began as a teacher training technique. It was developed at Stanford University by Dwight W. Allen in the 1960s. Here, a trainee teacher teaches a very small group, usually about 5 to 10 students, for a short period of time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and the focus is not on completing a big topic. Instead, the focus is on practicing one specific teaching skill. And the cycle of the process is plan, teach, feedback, replan, reteach, refeedback. For example, demonstration of two-digit multiplication methods, explaining how to use graphic organizer, integrating technology tools into teaching, or even handling controversial topics. Even though it started as a training technique, it has also been adapted as a teaching method in certain situations, especially when the group size is small, because the teacher can focus on individual performance and receive detailed feedback. And those are the advantages, along with refinement and polishing of teaching skills. But there is one limitation. It feels somewhat artificial. The classroom setting is controlled and small, so it doesn't fully represent the complexity of a real classroom. But the secret of successful micro-teaching is planning and preparation. That's all about teacher-centered methods. Now tell me, which one do you find the most interesting? Also, among the 4 methods in the question number 3 from the beginning, how many do you think are teacher-centered? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video. Take care and bye-bye.